Hello, everyone. Welcome to Fearfully and Wonderfully Me, a podcast designed to help you become the leader you are destined to be. Today's topic is all about belief drives behavior. And this isn't a new concept for me. In fact, there's a chapter in my book that I released last year, Fearfully and Wonderfully Me, um, that speaks to how belief drives behavior. And the interesting thing about writing a book and continuing to grow as an author and speaker and thought leader is that when you write something in a book, for example, and then you continue to grow, what happens is you continue to develop yourself, and then a year passes and suddenly you have new thoughts on this topic that you wrote about a year ago. So I wanted to revisit it because I'm seeing this concept from maybe just a new perspective or a new level. And that's the cool thing about growing and developing yourself, right? Whatever space you're in and whoever and wherever you're trying to influence other people and step into that role of the leader you're destined to be, the cool thing about it is as you grow and develop yourself, you're going to see things with a new level of awareness. It's just the byproduct of growth, if you want to call it that. And that's not a bad thing. It's a beautiful thing because it means that as you look back, you're like, wow, I've grown since then. And I wonder if I'm the only one who sometimes is frustrated with how slow sometimes it feels like that happens. And it's always interesting because I have a Amazon book reading list that is bigger than all of the books you see behind me. If you're watching the video, if you're listening to the audio on this podcast, you can't see the shelf of books behind me, but I have this huge bookshelf of books behind me of books that I've mostly read, but far greater than the books that I've read are the books that I want to read because I know that there is so much information out there that I don't know. And so I'm just always looking for books to add to my list and looking forward to the moment when I sit down and I read them and it changes the way that I think, right? I don't get tons of nuggets and insight and wisdom from every book that I read, but I really get fired up when I come across a book that gives me a new perspective, right? A new way of looking at something or seeing something or thinking about something. So recently, and I don't really know what triggered my thoughts to come back around to how belief drives behavior. Um, Except that I wrote down in my, it's not really a journal, but kind of my book that I capture all of my thoughts in. And I started like a new, from time to time, I either get a new book to capture my thoughts in, or, um, maybe I'm just kind of mentally starting a new chapter. And so I get a new journal slash book to capture my thoughts in, but whatever. So I did, and I'm just in the early pages of this new, I'll call it a journal, but it's not really a journal, really just a place to capture what I'm thinking about. It's always fascinating to go back and look at these years later and see where my thoughts were back then. But I'm just in the first few pages of this new notebook, and I underlined. I wrote down some thoughts a couple of days ago, and then I underlined belief drives behavior because that's kind of what was on my heart at the moment. And I underlined it, and then I circled it, and then I thought, this might be the title for my next book. I don't know, and it really was just a chapter and a concept in Fearfully and Wonderfully Me, but it's such a powerful concept on all levels. So I wanted to do a podcast episode kind of drilling down to why it's powerful and how we can learn to leverage that in our own lives. So um, some of this was really kind of just elaborating or digging deeper, right, to what I talked about in Fearfully and Wonderfully Me, um, because I've shared the example before of how what we believe about ourselves, about the world, about other people, heavily, heavily, heavily influences and determines how we interact with those other people, how the behaviors that we adopt for ourselves, the choices that we make as individuals is very, very, very heavily dictated, determined, and influenced by our beliefs about ourselves, about other people, and the world around us. So when we think about the power of self-limiting belief and overcoming self-limiting beliefs, I think it's really important to just take a step back and say, well, number one, what are those beliefs and how did they get there to begin with? So it's almost a two-step process to ask yourself, what are my beliefs? And let's just focus on self for the purposes of today's podcast, because we could do a whole nother episode, probably should do a whole nother episode on the beliefs about the interactions that we have with other people. But so I want to focus on beliefs about ourselves for this podcast. So really, when you think about that, have you ever just sat down and maybe journaled, scribbled, brainstormed, or thought about what beliefs do I have about myself? And it sounds funny when I say it out loud, but really it's a powerful process when we actually sit down and go, well, what beliefs do I have about myself? And then what which of those beliefs are not serving me? Which of those beliefs are holding me back? In other words, which of those beliefs are self-limiting beliefs? And which of those beliefs are actual, facts versus stories that I tell myself or have told myself to the point that I believe them? And I know, mind blown, right? Because we probably are not very comfortable with the concept that some of our beliefs about ourselves aren't true. And that's a little bit uncomfortable feeling, isn't it, when we think about that? And the reason I can say that is I've seen this in my certainly in my own life, but also in, people that I coach or teach to, and how so much of the time we create a story about ourselves, and then we adopt that story and we internalize it to the point that we are not even aware at some point that it's a story we've created or a belief that we've created. It just simply becomes a part of who we are. And so the problem with that is that that might or might not be based on true facts, but it still is heavily influencing our choices, our behaviors, our thoughts. And those choices, actions, and thoughts and behaviors have consequences, either positively or negatively. Now, I've shared with you before kind of that limiting belief I had about myself regarding my ability to be an athlete and to be a runner specifically, and how for a long time that really held me back from trying to do much of anything athletically, because I always had that self belief about myself that I'm like, well, I'm not really great at athletics. And so I didn't really act like I would be any good at it. And I didn't put forth much effort at it. And if you're not familiar with that story, I do speak to that in depth in Fearfully and Wonderfully Me. So I'm not going to repeat that here because it's on a previous podcast and it's a chapter in the book as well. But my point here is when I was able to, I realized that that was a self limiting belief and not necessarily a fact, then I could work to change it and overcome it. Now, absolutely, it's true that I'm not the world's greatest marathon runner, right? And that's a fact. But the limiting belief was saying I couldn't improve in my running or my athletic ability because I wasn't the world's greatest marathon runner, right? Do you see the difference? One of those statements is a fact. Physiologically, I'm not cut out to be the world's greatest marathon runner. But the belief that I cannot improve in my ability to run was a self-limiting belief. There was nothing physiologically holding me back from improving in that area, except my mind. My own mindset was what was holding me back there. Now, so as I share this and I teach on this, I'm very very fully aware that it's not a comfortable process. As I said a minute ago, it's not a comfortable process to sit down and examine the beliefs about ourselves with the understanding that some of them may be beliefs that we have created that are not based on reality. I know that that's not comfortable because none of us like to think about you know, none of us like to think about what's driving our behavior and our thoughts and our actions and choices. A lot of times might not be something that's true, right? We don't like to think about that. That's not a comfortable thought. It means what it means is that we're holding ourselves back. That's what it means. And so that's not a comfortable truth either. But I come back to again and again Michael Josephson's quote, we don't have to be sick to get better, right? There's nothing wrong with you. The fact that you may or may not have limiting beliefs, it just means you're human, right? We all have them. Don Miguel Ruiz speaks to kind of this concept, but he calls it domestication. And he doesn't really call it self-limiting beliefs, but domestication is a big word. And I prefer to break it down and to think about this concept in terms that I can actually apply to my own life. And so the word domestication, it just doesn't resonate with me. But self-limiting beliefs, you bet I know I have. I probably still have some that I'm not even aware of. Um, but through that process of whether Ruiz is calling it domestication or whether we're calling it self-limiting beliefs, through that process, what happens is that as we grow up and experience the world and interact with other people, a lot of times our beliefs about ourselves, well, and the world around us, but again, we're focusing on self for the purposes of today's podcast. Our beliefs about ourselves are very heavily influenced by the people around us as we grow up. Now, that makes perfect sense when we talk about it. And we see this, right? We see this in children who have parents who are, very affirming and believe in them and encourage them. And a lot of times those children grow up to be very confident and very secure. But we also see the opposite, right? You've seen children who didn't have encouraging, affirming parents and who weren't blessed with that opportunity. And, sometimes they can use that adversity and it makes them stronger, but a lot of times it also erodes their sense of self confidence and self worth. And that's a sad thing, right? Because every single one of us has worth as an individual. And we in a perfect world, everybody would be able to tap into their potential and their sense of self worth. And it's heartbreaking when we see people who don't believe in their own potential to do, be, and have whatever it is that they're dreaming about because they're not confident in their ability to grab onto it and to make it happen and become reality. So, as I think about this concept or as I share this concept with you, I think number one, I think it's powerful when we just sit down and go, okay, what are the beliefs I have about myself? Number one, get it out on paper, spend a few minutes of quiet time, journal about it, think about it, meditate, pray, but just examine what beliefs do I have about myself? Because I'm telling you, the first step in overcoming your limiting beliefs is to first be aware of them, right? We cannot change something if we're not really conscious of it to begin with. And in order to change those deeply rooted or maybe even unconscious self-limiting beliefs, you really have to be raising your level of awareness around them, right? You have to be identifying them. You have to first be aware of them because that's the first step in the process of overcoming them. And then I think it's important to think about that in terms of who and what in your life right now is influencing first that level of awareness relative to your beliefs about yourself. Who and what is influencing that? And then number two, who or what is influencing the quality of your thinking? Because the thought process is what's going to change what you do, right? And what you do is what's going to change the results that you're getting in your life. If you want to create or recreate some habits in your life that help you become more successful in whatever you're striving to do, that's going to start with thinking through that, right? What's going to start thinking through those habits? And when you drill down to it, really, knowing who and what is affecting the quality of your thinking is super, super, super important in helping us think better thoughts, right? If I want to change the quality of the thoughts that I'm having so that I change the quality of the decisions I'm making, I need to be very careful in allowing someone or something to heavily influence my thoughts. And so I wanted to share something with you. I actually jotted it down here in my little book. It was just a question I was kind of thinking about. Who or what influences the quality of your thinking? And maybe you have something different, but this is kind of what I came up with. Number one, the first thing that influences the quality of our thinking or my thinking is the people around us, right? The people around us definitely influence the quality of our thinking. There's no doubt. The people that we voluntarily choose to spend the most time with are the people that we become the most like, because the people around us start to affect us. They start to influence us, that we start to talk like they talk, we start to dress like they dress, we start to eat like they eat, usually for a and not a better way, right? It's always easier to be influenced negatively than positively. um, so we know this, right? Well, that's why we tell our teenagers not to hang around with certain other teenagers, because we know if they're running in the same crowd, it's very easy to make some of those same decisions, and usually those are not great decisions. So we already know this. It's common sense. The people around us influence our thinking. Well, I've said it before, but if you know that the people around you are influencing your thinking, I hope you are very intentional about who you choose to influence that level of thinking, right? I hope you are being very conscious of the relationships that you have, because those relationships influence your thinking. So I hope you're choosing good, positive relationships of people who have shared values. Number two, the energy of the people around you is influencing your thinking. And I know some of you are wondering, you're like, well, how is that different, right? How are the people influencing my thinking, but how is their energy influencing my thinking any different? Um, you've probably experienced this, where you know somebody and you might love them, they might be a great person, but they are just negative. Like, they're just negative person, and it doesn't matter what's going on. It might be the most gorgeous day in the world, but they're going to find something negative around it, right? And so even if you don't spend a lot of time with that person, their energy can very, very quickly influence your energy and the quality of your thinking. There was a quote I shared on social media by Jim Rohn, and it was a picture quote I shared just the other day that said, "There are some people you can afford to spend a few minutes with, but not a few hours." And I used a picture of a bad apple, because everybody knows, we use the analogy of a bad apple, because one bad apple very quickly contaminates the other apples, and then soon you've got a bag full of bad apples, right? And it's the same way with the energy, negative energy of a person. Even if you're not spending but just a few minutes with that person, it does not take very long for that negative energy to just rub off on you or affect you. And then you kind of feel like, eh. And let me just tell you, it's hard enough to stay on track and stay focused and to stay disciplined and working towards where you're going. You don't need any negative energy pulling you down or holding you back. And the reason I pull this out and just kind of share that is because a lot of times we think about people, or like, yeah, that person is fine, they're going a different direction than I am, and we know that, and we might even articulate that, but we're not very intentional about saying, you know what, not just that person and who they are as a person is influencing me, but the energy that they are attracting in their life by their decisions and their behaviors is also going to affect me. And that happens just that quick, right? And it does. It does. You've been in situations, maybe you've been in a meeting at work, and someone comes into the room who just has negative energy, and you can just shift. You can feel the shift of energy in the room, and you can just feel the tension start to rise and the stress start to rise. And it might happen just within 20 seconds, right? Maybe that person didn't even say anything, but you could feel the energy shift. And so that's why I wanted to point that out, is that's the second thing that can affect our thoughts and our thinking and our energy. Number 3, the environment around us. The environment around you is affecting the quality of your thinking. And, we can see this play out in big ways and small ways. It's been several years ago when Mac and I were living in an apartment, and we used to say we had a small herd of large elephants living above us. And there's no doubt that I was less productive in that environment. Now, there's nothing wrong with living in an apartment, and certainly the family above us, they just had some kids. It's not like they were intentionally trying to make a lot of noise in our environment. They're just walking around upstairs. But there's no doubt that that environment affected my productivity and the quality of my thoughts. And having changed that environment, it definitely has changed the ability and quality of the thoughts that I think. Now, you might not be able to instantly change where you're living. If you're like, you know what, I'm in an apartment too, but I have people living above me, but I can't do anything about that right now. That's okay, right? Remember, the power of being proactive is to focus on what we can control. So maybe you can't control exactly where you're living in this moment, but or working, right? Maybe your office environment is noisy or stressful or not as productive as you would like. But what can you do, right? When I look around at my environment, there are things that I can do to make that help me be more productive or help me have better quality of thoughts. By that, I mean, I keep here on my desk the books that I'm actively reading or considering or reviewing. Because when I read a book, I go in and I underline a lot of quotes and things like that. But I also keep that book around for a little while. I don't know how long, and because I'm referring back to it, right? I'm not done with. I'm not ready to file that book away yet. I'm still referring to it. I'm still thinking on it. Maybe pulling out some of the quotes that I underlined. And so I keep those books handy, not just the books I'm actively reading and working on, but the books that I've just finished that are still here and I'm not ready to file them away. And then I also keep, I've got my little thought journal here because having that very close in my environment is going to make it much easier for me to pull that out and capture a thought. So that is affecting my thinking. That's an example of how that's affecting my thinking positively, is just having resources to think on. I think a lot of people just assume that when I talk about thinking, it means that you're just going to sit down somewhere quiet and thoughts are just going to pop into your head. Now, that does happen sometimes, but honestly, for me, it's not usually when I'm sitting somewhere quiet that thoughts pop into my head. It's when I'm doing something like running or something mindless, like washing dishes or juicing up fruits and vegetables. Right? It's something that my hands are involved in or my feet are involved in, but my mind is free to just think. And that seems to be a very great way for me to think on thoughts. So when I talk about changing the quality of your thinking, especially as it relates to self limiting beliefs, I'm not saying just sit down somewhere and a thought's going to magically pop into your head. Um, Most of the time, it's been my experience that I need to read something or look at something or hear something that is thought provoking, right? And then later in that quiet time, I have something that I'm like, oh, I need to think about that. What thoughts do I have around that? Is it true? Do I agree with it? Why or why not? So, the environment around you can influence your thinking. And then that brings me to number 4, which is what you read, listen to, watch, of course, obviously. Those are inputs into your brain, and they are going to change positively or negatively the quality of your thinking. And then last but not least, what I wrote down in my little thought book is that our physical health can influence our thinking. And this comes down to how much sleep we're getting, the quality of the nutrition that we're putting in our body. I read something not too long ago that talked about how much what large percentage of the calories that we eat goes to fuel our brain. And I'm serious. It was something like 400 calories a day are what your brain is using to produce your thinking and to drive your body and all of the things that the brain does. I mean, 400 calories a day is diverted to feed the brain, literally. And that's why when you are hungry, you don't think as well. And that was, I mean, maybe you guys already know this, but that was powerful for me to just remember, hey, when I'm starving or I haven't had anything to eat or I skipped lunch somehow, is not the best time for me to be making big decisions because I'm not going to be thinking my best thoughts or my clearest thoughts. That brain fog when you're hungry is a real physiological thing. Your body is just running on empty, and your brain does not do well on a starvation intermittent fasting diet. Your brain is like, hello, I need food to think the best thoughts. So the quality of the nutrition that we're putting into our body can really change or influence the way that we're thinking. So, all that to say, when I consider that and you sit down and you start to think about your beliefs about yourself, it's important to consider, how did that belief get there? Right? I want you to think about that as you brainstorm on your list of beliefs about yourself, and then whether those beliefs are limiting beliefs that you've created at some point or someone else has helped you create at some point, or whether those are true fact-based things. You want to be thinking about, how did that belief get there? Was it something that someone said and I just internalized it? Um, where did it come from, right? Is it something that I have just continued to tell myself over and over the years until I believe it? And there absolutely will be some beliefs about yourselves that are facts, right? I have green eyes. That's a fact, right? That's a belief I have, but it's also a belief that's based on, I can see in the mirror I have green eyes. That's not really the beliefs that I'm talking about. That's just a physiological fact. But there again, I'm not the world's best marathon runner. That's also a fact and a belief I have about myself. But it becomes a limiting belief when I say, not only am I not the world's best marathon runner, but I cannot improve in my running, right? So you see how it's very easy from that to cross the line from a belief to a limiting belief. The fact that I'm not the world's best marathon runner, it just is. It's not a positive thing or a negative thing unless I tell myself it's a positive or negative thing. But if I allow that to hold me back from growing in my athletic ability, if that's what I decide to do, then it becomes a self-limiting belief. So it's very easy for us to create those about ourselves. And I've heard so many from people over the years, things like, I'm not smart enough to get this degree that I want, or I'm not business savvy. I wouldn't be good at running my own business. I wouldn't make a good entrepreneur. Um, I'm not good at remembering names. Oh, that's a big one. I hear so many people say, I'm not good at remembering names. Well, look, if you tell yourself over and over that you're not good at remembering names, you're not going to be good at remembering names. So quit telling yourself that. Figure out some tips and tricks to help develop that skill, because it is a skill. It absolutely is a skill. And you can improve that skill just like any other skill. Um, I'm not, a lot of times we base our sense of self-worth on a physical fact. Or even worse, we base our sense of self-worth based on what somebody else thinks about our physical fact. Don't let anyone else determine your sense of self-worth, right? Don't let anyone else's perceptions of you determine your self-worth, because that's a limiting belief you cannot afford to have. Trust me, we get in enough trouble just on our own thinking. Don't allow anybody else to negatively influence that or hold you back, right? It's your identity and your the only one who can reach into that sense of self-worth and claim that and build your identity based on that. Um, so I know I've shared a lot of information with you on this podcast episode about the process of becoming aware of our self-limiting beliefs. And that is so powerful because there again, our belief drives our behavior. Our beliefs determine our behavior, right? What you believe determines what you think about, how you behave, what choices you're making, and ultimately affecting your influence with yourself and the other people in the world around you. Until next time.